Hi, I'm Taylor Hardwick. I'm a PhD candidate at Swinburne University. Before I start, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which I live and work, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations, and pay my respects to their elders past and present. So my paper for DiGRA this year is from my PhD research, which focuses on safety and accessibility at online games events in 2020. And I'll be talking about Freeplay Independent Games Festival, arguing that the Freeplay Zone, a virtual hangout space created for the 2020 festival, was a successful safe event space because of the deliberate choices made by its creators, Jay Stewart and Cecile Richard, and Freeplay's organisers over time to centre the community's needs and to make them feel included and welcome. So games events are important for community engagement and industry networking. They offer people involved in games production the ability to connect with others and to share knowledge and resources. The pandemic has demonstrated how vital gathering together, preferably in co-present spaces, is for people on both a personal and professional level. However, consumer-facing and industry events have been addressed in game scholarship as sites of harassment and gatekeeping of marginalised people, such as women, people of colour, and LGBTQIA+ people, by those in positions of privilege and power. Given the importance of events to games communities, I'm interested in understanding how safety is approached and experienced in these contexts, and then thinking about how they could be made safer and more welcoming. To do so, I took a digital ethnography approach to observing Freeplay across the digital platforms it was hosted on, YouTube and The Zone. Sarah Pink's approach to digital ethnography is flexible, adaptable and embodied, and Kishona Gray's observations of community practices in women's online gaming communities provided a helpful framework for examining the event. So in practice, I attended Freeplay, watched talks, participated in workshops and hung out in the Freeplay zone playing games, dancing and chatting with everyone else. I also conducted semi-structured interviews with Freeplay organisers to gain insight into how the event was delivered and how safety factored into the planning process, and with Freeplay attendees to get an understanding of their experiences at the festival. So Freeplay began in 2004 as a response to the commercial and exclusionary practices that were at the time typical of larger game studios in Australia. So from the beginning, Freeplay has positioned itself as an alternative space to mainstream games cultures, and challenging the status quo has always been central to its purpose. And this involves considering issues facing the games industry, as well as broader systemic issues. So over time, Freeplay's directors and volunteers have made thoughtful choices around opening the space to people who are marginalised or excluded in games, and vitally have supported these choices with actions that have resulted in Freeplay being considered inherently safe by its community. So for example, following a controversial panel in 2011, then director Paul Callahan implemented gender parity quotas for the 2012 festival, aiming to make Freeplay more inclusive for women. During Chad Toprak's tenure as director, he's made efforts to include game makers from Southeast Asia, which is a region often overlooked in the global game making community. Chad also introduced the Freeplay Code of Conduct and Safer Spaces policy when he came on board as director in 2017. The policy articulates Freeplay's goal in, quote, providing an explicitly safe space for people to talk, end quote, and it states behaviours deemed acceptable and unacceptable in achieving these goals. The positioning of Freeplay as a safe space for its community signals an explicit focus on making people who are otherwise marginalised feel safe and comfortable at the event. In interviews, I asked Freeplay's organisers who they thought the typical person that attends Freeplay is. And their answers included young people, students, experimental game makers, artists from neighbouring creative disciplines, open-minded and politically minded people, and marginalised people. So consistently, their responses focused on people who, to use Chad's words, sit at the fringes of game making or artistic practice or of society more broadly. Attendees and organisers also described Freeplay to me using words like cosy, tight-knit and welcoming. And this was clear during the 2020 festival, where people were very excited to see each other and they showed visible affection for the event's organisers and other community members. So the community is small and familiar with each other, and Chad's friendly approach to directing the festival and bringing people together has really created a warm and welcome atmosphere. So of course, because of COVID, Freeplay was held online in June 2020. The program consisted of speaker sessions, workshops, and performances that were all streamed live to YouTube throughout the festival, with the audience interacting through the YouTube chat function. But on the second last day of the festival, the Freeplay Zone opened. It was created by game maker Jay Stewart and artist and game maker Cecile Richard, who are both Freeplay community members. The zone is based on the open source code for digital gallery space Like Online, which was created by game maker and academic Paolo Pedicini. So the Freeplay Zone was intended to be a virtual space for attendees to interact with each other and to watch the live sessions being streamed via embedded video while in one centralized space, akin to an in-person gathering. And the zone was an instant success. It quickly became attendees' preferred space to be, with interactions in the YouTube chat somewhat diminishing for the rest of the festival. So while the YouTube chat was carefully moderated, there were fewer considerations made regarding safety tools in the zone. The source code did include both automated and manual moderation functions, like the ability to ban or kick people, but at no point were these intentionally used. Freeplay Safer Spaces policy is accessible on the website, and this is important because clear and visible policies let attendees know what behaviours are expected and how to go about reporting if they're made to feel uncomfortable or unsafe. But the policy wasn't linked to or made visible anywhere in the zone. And when I spoke to attendees, many told me that they didn't access it at all during 2020's festival. But despite this, and despite there being few considerations around how to make the space safe through moderation tools, everyone I spoke to expressed that they felt extremely safe and comfortable in the zone, with festival coordinator Ben Turner describing it to me as an unintentional safe space. So I realized that I'd kind of taken for granted the importance of policy and moderation processes for fostering a safe digital space, because clearly something else is going on here. So one reason I'd argue that the Freeplay Zone felt so safe was because it was very clearly a space for the Freeplay community. So Rosemary Clark Parsons argues that when it comes to safe spaces, quote, the group's safety is predicated on its status as an inclusive space for otherwise excluded people, end quote. So several design choices made it clear that the zone was a Freeplay community space. The very first screen displays an acknowledgement of country that requires you to click acknowledge before moving on to avatar creation. And then in the main exhibition space, which is displayed on the right of the screen, the Aboriginal, trans and pride flags were clearly displayed on the ceiling, demarcating the space as one for people who are typically marginalised. And then other details like the fairy lights adorning each room, which are a reference to the decorations usually at an in-person Freeplay night market, and the choice to locate the space in a Melbourne-esque warehouse deliberately speak to Freeplay community members by referencing in-jokes and common venues of in-person Freeplays. So apologies for the long quote on screen here, but I think that here the zone's artist Cecile really articulates how the design choices they and Jay made, and the addition of the structural requirement to acknowledge country before you enter, signals to community members that this space is for them, but also to people who may have more malicious intentions that they weren't welcome in the zone. As Cecile says, these details didn't leave room for ambiguity. So I'd argue that though the Safer Spaces policy was absent from the zone, these choices very clearly communicated the kind of behaviour that was acceptable in a way that didn't limit interactions, but instead empowered attendees to interact with each other more freely and comfortably. And during interviews and in the zone, attendees often expressed discomfort with social media, but a preference for spaces like the zone, such as this succinct comment in the image on screen. And here I think it's worth noting the history of corporate-owned social media platforms like YouTube and Twitter, particularly their silencing of and downright active hostility toward marginalised people through both excessive moderation of their content and a lack of moderation around hate speech and other harmful content levelled at women, people of colour, and LGBTQIA+ people. I think it's also notable that platforms like YouTube were key sites of harassment and organising during Gamergate. So of course, YouTube was a useful space for Freeplay to host the festival because it afforded simple live streaming, archiving, and communication. But no wonder people in games who typically sit at the fringes feel more unsafe using these spaces, even when they are carefully moderated for an event. So what can Freeplay in the zone tell us about safety at events? First, the work of Freeplay's directors, organisers and volunteers in centering the community's needs over time has fostered an event, an event that's considered safe and inclusive by attendees. The second thing is the deliberate construction of the zone as a space by community members for community members. The space's inclusive design choices clearly articulated who it was and wasn't for. And this resulted in the community feeling a sense of ownership over the space in a way that they couldn't with a platform like YouTube. So I'd argue that for events, safety can't be top down, and it has to be the starting point rather than an afterthought. Further, while policies are helpful tools, they should be supported by clear actions by organisations taking their community's needs into account. And the Freeplay Zone demonstrates that safety approaches are unique to each community rather than a one-size-fits-all problem. So thanks so much for listening. I look forward to answering any questions you might have.